Hey Joash Matthew, pleasure to having you with us on the background of Aquabeats. Um, just tell us about yourself and what Kontali does, and then we can proceed with the questions.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here today with you. I'm Joash Matthew. I'm a shrimp analyst in Kontali. So, Kontali, we are a data driven and insights and market intelligence company. We're based in the Netherlands and Norway with our head office over there. We go across various species, but today I think we're talking about shrimp, so we'll stick to that. And I have a background in policy and trade in the seafood sector. And right now, I am looking into and deep diving into analysis of shrimps on a weekly basis, as well as looking at the overall picture globally across the key producers and key markets.
Great, Joash, and I'm sure that the kind of background that you have, it will be useful for the industry to know the market trends, right? So let me just put it across like this: that while there's global volatility, market irregularities, and a lot of uncertainties, right? We say that it is not in our hands. We cannot do much about it. However, Joash Matthew will be able to show the direction as to how the market is evolving and how better we can be prepared as an industry, right? So I would like to brief the audience about the key trends and how the market is evolving, and if you can just share your learnings
Yep.
about how we can be better prepared to face this uncertainty.
Yep. So let me start by saying this: compared to 2024 and 2025, the volumes that were exported globally has stayed a bit above the 2024 volumes. So almost all the countries have the key markets have imported in a positive trend compared to 2024, except for China, with a bit of -1% of a year-over-year volume has been supplied. But that's to be also taken into account that China itself is a big producer of shrimp themselves. So overall, the trend of market imports of shrimp into these key markets globally has been positive. Having said that, what was interesting to see last year was how the volumes moved. So we had the tariff situation impacted from the U.S., which actually impacted a lot of the movement of the supply chains from these key producing countries. So we saw very quickly the volumes that were produced moved to different and new avenues of markets were supplied to. Now, volatility can happen. What I do see is that we can be more prepared on elements that you can really try the best possible way to be as prepared as possible. So this could include having a bit more of in-depth understanding of how can the producers themselves, so the farmers, absorb these kind of unforeseen circumstances. So these guys can have a lot of impact in such situations as it trickles down from the upside of the supply chain. So it's important to understand how we can bear these shocks. So it's unavoidable in these uncertainties, but then we can always be very much more prepared to bear these shocks and having a bit more focus on the longer term on how producers are being impacted on this will be interesting to look into for various stakeholders as a sector or the policy or the government itself. This will allow for a long-term sustainability of the production as well as the supply will keep on going through. And from a market perspective, of course, there should, I think, the trade negotiations between countries, that's going to be a very important element to look forward to. We see a lot of movement of free trade agreements between India, for example, with a lot of the countries. One of that coming up with the UK. I think that is going to be also an interesting trend to look forward to as new avenues will open up these kind of trade policy discussions and establishing those rules between these different markets allow the sector to very quickly navigate in terms of sending the supply somewhere else more in a less stressful way when something like that happens in the future.
Right. What are the successful models that you have seen yourself, in the sense that which countries have shown preparedness to navigate all those challenges?
I don't see that that yet. I do not have an idea specifically on certain examples. But what we did see was there was an advantageous situation for the tariff, for example, for some countries versus the others. So India had a very significant tariff, which did impact eventually, and the the importers in these markets were looking then suddenly to shift their supply source to other countries. So it's more the circumstances and the trade relationships to a certain extent that helped also establish the impact of the volumes going through. But we also saw that for the US, for example, the overall impact was that Ecuador increased their market share in 2025 compared to 2024, whereas India slightly reduced. So it was more the resistance that the channels were established already between US and India, for example, that helped Indian suppliers to still get their product into the market. However, the advantageous tariff rates that happened to go to Ecuador in the end helped them forward to get their market share higher in the US market especially.
India has signed a lot of FTAs,
Yeah.
right? And that shows the interest of global buyers in
Yeah.
India. And I believe that now it is the time to convert our deal into delivery. So, and it is also for sure that the buyers are looking for, players who they can do business based on long-term trust,
Yeah.
right? So, I would want to understand from you what are the buyers' preferences given this context, and how the consumer requirements are evolving.
Right. So there are two parts of this element, and something to be very clear about is that FTAs being signed and when it comes into force are two different timelines. So already being prepared, better understanding when it's going to come into force has to be already taken into account, and you can work towards that timeline, and that gives more clarity to importers as well when they should source in certain periods. So it's important to always keep in mind when the FTAs are coming into force. That's having said that, in general, shrimp is always consumed globally, and what is interesting to see is that the various markets are evolving on their consumer habits. So it's important to see what their customer purchasing power is, and that also indicates what kind of food they like. For example, in the south of Europe, they prefer more with shell-on products because they are culturally having some cuisines that involve that kind of variety of shrimps, for example. And we see that in our data as well, that a lot of that shrimp with those shells are actually going to the south, whereas in the north of Europe, we see a lot of the peel products are going in. And these go into ready-to-eat meals. You have a more working population. They would like to have during the summers a pre-made salad, for example, with shrimps in it, where they can eat at the park. So these consumer trends have to be very much looked into before you send the product. So if you have a product that you have a certain way of processing it, the next step would be to see which kind of markets actually absorb these kind of products in the first place. We have seen some growing trends in Asian markets as well. The purchasing power is increasing in many of the countries, and also these are people who are working more, and the workforce is increasing, so we have less time to cook. There is more
Yeah.
population also tends in Asia, for example, have less footfall on wet markets, and they are more moving on to digital supply streams of getting their products in. But then that goes into another perspective of buyers who are looking into certain products they want to eat. Another interesting trend that we saw was that how do people behave when there is a global conflict. So when there's a global conflict, sometimes people can be very conservative how they spend their money. So during these key issues such as what we saw with the energy crisis in the Middle East, people tend to stop buying expensive forms of protein and start to rely on more cheaper sources of protein. Another way of looking at it is that frozen shrimp, for example, which has a very long shelf life, people can tend to buy more or inclined to buy more frozen shrimps, and so they can store it much more easily in their freezer and take it out when they need it. So it's also interesting to see the dynamics of when such global conflicts or impactful inflation-based impacts to consumers happen. It can be very quick that a consumer might actually stop buying a product, especially when the price point is high, and go for the next best cheaper alternative in this case.
Now, when we look at India's story, India is highly fragmented, right? And we are a volume player. Now, looking at the trends that we've just now indicated, I'm sure that that segment will be a niche segment, right? So, when we try to look at the long-term risk management strategy, what, according to you, should how India should maximize this opportunity of entering into the niche market at the same time continue being a volume player? How should they navigate both the segments, given the fact that this segment is very niche?
Right. So let me start by saying that India has been a global player and established itself as a as a big global player in the shrimp market, and that has come from a form of years of work from a lot of the key players across the stakeholders. But now, looking ahead, because we have entry of countries like Ecuador, which don't have such a fragmented market, which is their advantage in their geography, that makes them a bit more efficient in how they deal with their own supply chains. So it's more top-bottom pillars in which they're able to efficiently communicate across the value chain. India has been working in a certain way up until now very successfully. But when you have such competition, it also indicates, okay, let's look what is our strategy forward. I think what's going to be important is collaboration and communication, more streamlined across the value chain. Although it's super difficult because you also have a lot of states involved and a lot of languages and a lot of different ways of production, and the temperature and environments are super different. But if we can start, if there's one form of efficiency that can be done better for anybody in general, is always trying to communicate and be as closely connected with each other, so that when there is a global impact, it doesn't have to be that as long as the demand from up down is coming down, that's when you start to react. Rather, the industry as a whole very quickly is on the same page, and you are able to react to certain situations much more quickly. However, that has to be discussed, and I think the stakeholders are doing that in places like this, and there's a lot of discussions. I believe a lot of discussions are going on to actually improve this this area, and we heard that from another speaker yesterday as well, who mentioned about the increased communication across the supply chain. That could be one way of getting in the long term. So starting a dialogue and seeing, remapping what is the next 10 years going to look like, and how the industry as a whole can deal with the future shocks, so that both the production and the suppliers are not affected within the country.
What is the opportunity cost of not collaborating in Indian context, given the fact that India is marching forward towards an ambitious target of $30 billion by 2030?
So that is your opportunity, right? So that's what you're heading towards. And if you don't have a plan to reach there, then that's probably going to be the loss of not reaching that goal. So it's too early for me to say anything on that, because I'm not in the on ground level. But I think that there should be some form of discussion in general that is probably happening right now, and then we will have to wait and see and give it some time, because once this whole discussions around these global trade talks settle down and come into force, I think that will actually start channeling some new trends on how volumes are supplied and how much confidence the farmers have to produce more shrimp.
Right. So we need to be more prepared to pave a path forward that is more inclusive, that is more integrated, and that is based on mutual benefits, if I can put it across like that.
Yeah, it's a country, right? So you're looking at it from a country specific, not rather a company specific. So from a country specific, indeed, it's beneficial for everybody in the value chain to have this benefit. So it's beneficial for everybody. So I believe that everybody has a perspective of mutual benefit because they are all dependent on each other to keep the value chain intact. So I'm very positive about those relationships for sure. But what is the issue is not within, but rather the impact from outside. So it's more the uncertain or unforeseen impacts that come from outside that actually cause more damage than a perspective of looking from inside out, which is generally pretty intact in place. So it's more about preparedness. How do we deal with another tariff? What happens the next time this is going to happen? What is our game plan? Or if there is going to be another energy crisis, what is the game plan? Because we see a lot of the input costs have been increasing for farmers, and that is causing a lot of stress for them if they are especially smaller sized farmers, and that could in the longer term we impact in a psychological perspective of a farmer, like what should he do if he is going to do the next cropping or not, or is he going to not renew his land lease and stop shrimp farming. So we have to really take into account the human perspective of the supply chain, especially from a farmer perspective, in the sense that we have to have them prepared for any future impacts that is not surprising. Rather that okay, we are ready for it. We are able to work together, both from a government perspective to support these various stakeholders in the mode of crisis, as well as each other. That they know that if something like this happens in the future, this is what we are going to do, and more or less everything can change very quickly. But at least having a broader game plan on what to do in these crisis modes is going to be a good thing to look at in the future.
What do you think? How is India headed towards realizing that potential?
I think India knows very well as a value-added product supplier globally that what is the market, right? But I don't see, again, as I mentioned, it's very established chains of exports to various countries. But in today's world, we don't live in a world that is certain in terms of trade flows. And that is more where, again, an external pressure that comes into it. We see a lot of, like for example, Vietnam has some interesting potential of reprocessing capacities. We do see a lot of that happening over there. But then it is another industry decision to make, is that are we starting to go into very specific forms of processing? So because the market is so diverse and you have so many different types of demands of shrimp products in different forms and different types to eat, is that the right call for the sector or not? That is something for the sector to decide, because it's more about understanding what is the best next step based on the consumer's demand. And if it's that you have business as usual is the best option, then that is the best option for the industry.
So, in the next 5 to 10 years, what are the pillars that will decide who loses, who wins?
Yeah.
This is my last question.
Absolutely, excellent question, because I think that does not just apply for Indian producers, but basically all the key producers globally. The first thing is going to be the policy. So the trade relationships within the country is going to be the biggest big boon to the country that have established it, because you have a more concrete channel for the products to move more swiftly. Better tariffs rates can have actually a very good impact on having more of the volumes to come into those markets, and that's going to be very critical moving forward. Having a more certainty of multiple market accesses very quickly when things needs to move. that also gives an opportunity to also develop your reputation in those various new markets that you're trying to look at, especially looking towards the East or Middle East area as well, and Australia, for instance. So, which we have a free trade agreement also with. These kind of new markets, establishing them, that's going to be a very key element. Secondly, I really feel is going to be the environmental conditions. We have the El Nino effect, which actually also we see with the fish meal prices in Peru increasing, which subsequently impacts feed prices. The weather conditions, if it is lack of rain, for example, increases salinity of the ponds, which is also not good. And then sometimes, for example, if it is good weather, it's a winter. Second half of weather in Ecuador is winter is warmer than usual. That means they could actually have a better production. So the climatic conditions have to be taken into account. So that's also something that you have to look forward into, not just from a trade perspective, but really being prepared as closely as possible of what is going to happen with the weather conditions in the world. That's something to really keep an eye out on, and the dry spells, the heat levels, and being prepared of what happens when the weather is too hot or too rainy, or it's going to be sudden rain showers as well. So the environmental part of it is going to be very, very key. And lastly, that's something that we have to wait and see, is how the global markets normalize again. So what is the inflation rate across those key markets, and what is the consumer behavior after that? Because now it's all about how much can the consumer afford to buy and how frequently will they buy a product. Of course, it's not a big sell to sell shrimps. It's a very usual part of the diet in most of the markets, but it's more about how much will they be buying it, at what rate, and that clearly is much based on the purchasing power of the consumer, as well as what is the price of the shrimp that is being sold.
So can we say that there are immense possibilities,
Yeah.
right? And at the same time, there are few factors, external factors, which are not in our hands.
Yeah.
And looking at India's fragmentation, at the same time looking at India's competitive edge of India being one of the fastest growing economies, right? We have tremendous potential, and hence we have to broaden our horizon and look at the possibilities and work out collectively
Yeah.
to sort out the issues and challenges, right?
Yeah, and so it's more about, indeed, as you said, talking to each other a bit more. If that is already the case, start getting to more of these long-term plans of what is the next goals that we're looking at. So we are not looking at short-term impacts of your decisions. We're looking of, let's see, how we are going to evolve in the longer term, because Ecuador is here to stay, other countries are going to be here to stay, the competition is always going to be there. But for instance, also India as a country has a lot of leverage when it comes to international relationships, what they do across the world. So that is something that is also a very good positive point compared that to some other country, right? So all these things, everybody has something good for them and something not that good for them.
Yeah.
And it's about when to leverage it, and looking forward. We'll let the competition be there. It's
Yeah.
kind of healthy to have,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but it also means that we cannot just stop still on that point. It's important to also look ahead, and those are going to be the key drivers to have those volumes sustain in the growth patterns that we have seen so far from India, and to keep that momentum going ahead. Even though some once in a while some of these uncertain events or unfavorable events happen, and the resistance power of the sector, it will be tested. But the good thing about it is that you know where your weak points are, and you can work on it a bit better. That's kind of the perspective to look ahead.
Right. So, Joash, since this discussion will be seen by the wide array of industry stakeholders, right,
Yeah.
across the value chain, including investors, since you have touched upon a very important point, which is fish meal, right? El Nino is impacting Indian shrimp farmers tremendously. Our shrimp farmers in are in distress. We are fighting for the survival of the industry, right? It's become worse, than we can think of. The positive part is world world is bracing for the deficit of fish meal by 2030. India already has 45%, and our government of India is coming up with national framework on fishery improvement project.
Yeah.
Okay, that will encompass all the fish meal producers into one national fishery improvement project umbrella. So that will give access to everyone, right? We will have abundant fish meal, and you know that fish meal is highly palatable, and it has a tremendous impact on the quality of high premium species like shrimp, right? Ultimately, we have to stay competitive by being a quality producer that we can give at a affordable prices,
Yeah.
right? It's all about the price scale, right? And also the quality. So India stands at the inflection point, right, where we have abundant fish meal waiting for to be harnessed sustainably. And then, of course, we will have our own standards that will give fair market access to everyone. And our shrimp farmers will have, because see, when we have something abundant, the prices will come down, right? Everyone can make, good access of it,
Yeah.
right? And then I'm sure that going forward, we are fighting our own challenges right now, but I'm sure going forward, we will have good quality of shrimps
Yeah.
at an affordable prices, because fish meal is the primary ingredient that enters into feed, and
Yeah.
feed is the 70% of the cost,
Right.
of the production cost of the
Yeah.
farmer, right? So that's one of the developments I wanted to share with you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a very interesting element because that's where the margins are going to be
absolutely.
thinned.
Absolutely.
That's what kind of that's where the impact starts at down up. So the farmers are the ones who are going to be impacted by these price upticks, right? So you're already either or at break even, and
Yeah.
after that pressure more, that goes down. But the other thing that you said, that's again a form of preparedness. So the you're already starting to prepare yourself because you're foreseeing the El Nino impact that it is going to have. Of course,
It should not impact us.
yeah. So that's the point of
It should
preparedness.
not have impacted us in the first place because we have abundant fish meal, right?
Yeah.
So yes.
So in that's again like you're trying to reallocate those
Yeah.
kind of.
We are trying to realign
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah, but that's an
uh,
example of being prepared.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And India has become very active in the sense that we need standards.
Yeah.
We need our own standards. We need our own improvement frameworks.
Yeah.
Right. That will open up the opportunities to the 90% small scale farmers and fishermen that we have.
Yeah.
Right. And that will make sure that they are getting access to technology,
Yeah.
capacity building, right, and market access.
Yeah.
Because if a country like us gets the opportunity to trade on fair terms, we will do wonders.
Yeah. And a good quality products goes a long way, right? So
Yeah.
nobody is not going to say no to buying a good quality product. So it's in everybody's benefit to have good quality and standards. But I feel a lot of those are already being discussed at multiple levels, from farmer associations to a collaborative effort across the value chain. Because most of the time the certification scheme pressure comes from up down, but also there is also bilateral standards that's being implemented at the ground level, at farmer level. So the combination of it in the end gives a good quality, consistently good quality product. With or without certification, countries are going to then buy it. So
Right.
those companies that require certification, then you have those channels of farms that are in those certification schemes. Otherwise, if you have a general certification or general standards, that are being placed that already upholds the sector to bring about a good quality product which anybody will in the end just buy, and that reliability of a good quality product will also in the end go a long way in that sense. And what I would also like to also highlight is that too many certifications is also sometimes a problem that I do hear from a lot of farmers, for instance, because then you have to comply to. It's a very extensive process to get all those documentations in place, and it's more about the manpower, etc. So it's always a little bit of a fine tuning of what is the farm like, or who the farmer is, and at what capacity are they working at. So a general answer is not everybody should be certified, but rather it's about everybody is at a good standard. And if we have the capacity and there is a premium to it, of course, and those added values to it, that changes the game. But in the end of the day, there are also markets that don't need those certifications, and they are still buying it because the product is good.
Right. Great. So, well, we have had a very rounded discussion focusing on India, how India can leverage its competitive position by being a quality seafood player.
So I can kind of summarize like what I said, and just some key points over there. India has so far done a good job in coming to what stage it is, right? So it's one of the top players in shrimp trade, and there's no doubt about it. It has established itself into various markets already as a very trusted source of shrimps, and now would be the moment. I think what we have from the learnings from the last year is that what do we do for the next 10 years, for example, and that's going to be the next discussion that will be undertaken, where these how can we absorb those impacts when there is a global impact or a catastrophe or a crisis. That's going to be an interesting discussion ahead, and that's something that I believe a lot of the stakeholders are discussing, and the outcomes of it should be the result that in the future, whenever something happens, the sector is very well prepared to absorb that. Secondly, is the competitiveness of the sector. In the end, of course, you're going to have a lot of competition globally, especially from Ecuador or from the other parts. It's important to understand that what kind of products are going around. So you have more head-on, shell-on, for example, coming from Ecuador compared to more HLS or peel coming from India. So there is also some minor dynamics that go underneath these kind of trade flows. So understanding what the market is and which markets should be targeted, and having a bit more of a fine-tuned focus, that's going to be an interesting element for these companies to look at. And the price point. So the issue of reducing or controlling the input costs for the farmers would be an important aspect to look into, because they are the guys producing the shrimps in the end of the day, who are primarily also small-scale farmers, and supporting them to deal with those kind of price shocks and price increases, and having them also being healthy in this whole supply chain is also an important factor, because they are the producers of shrimp, and they are the producers, and they will supply the rest of the value chain. So it's always goes from also down up, but also up from the exporter side as well. There are both ways of addressing all the challenges across the supply chain, and more conversations always help, more discussions, and more unified approach of such crisis management, and uniform approach on how to sustain the sector on and keep the quality, the price, and the supply in the longer term more sustainable, in terms of building trust with new countries and new markets, and building that long-term goal of being the established supplier of certain kinds of shrimp products, because competition, whether it be in any part of the world, is always going to be there. It has to be the strategy of the respective country who is in that sector to deal with that, and be ready and expand their businesses across. And there is a lot of opportunity, and India, I feel, is probably also looking towards that goals that they have set for themselves, and they should be working towards it as they are currently discussing about it. So we will see in a few years and have a talk about it to see how what's the status quo as of it then.
Great, Joash. And I would like to end this discussion with one of the highlights that that insight was discussed with me during one of the podcasts with one of the gentlemen in Netherlands. So his name is Vincenzo Zono. He said that India has immense potential. India has unutilized resources. India can compete with China. Big words, right? India can compete with China going forward only when we go collectively. We open up the channels of communication for more robust discussion. Policy makers have a huge role to play, and that is why Aquabeats exists. Our main mission is to align policymakers, scientific institutions, right, industry, markets and buyers,
Yep.
investors, to bring a cohesive channel of like-minded stakeholders
Yep.
to position India as one of the sustainable, responsible, and trustworthy seafood players. And thank you so much, Joash.
Absolutely.
Pleasure having you with me. And I hope to see you sometime in Netherlands.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Likewise. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.